Okay, perfect. So I'll go ahead and get started. Today we'll be going over the rental property registration for units in Mountain View covered by rent stabilization. So before we jump into it, as a reminder, city staff cannot offer any sort of legal advice, but we do offer tips and best practices and just a general overview of the city's actions regarding the Community Stabilization and Fair Rent Act. I'll talk just a little bit about mobile homes. I know all of our mobile homes have already registered, so I won't spend too much time there. Okay, so I am Andrea Kennedy. I work with the city's rent stabilization program. Also on our staff who generally helps with registration and invoicing is Andrea Pena and Jessica Spikes. So you might have also talked with either of them if you've had any questions about registration. So I'm just going to go through the presentation. I like to keep it pretty casual. So if you have any questions during any point in the PowerPoint or when I go through the website, you can just raise your hand if you want to speak your question or type it in the Q&A. So we'll talk a little bit about an overview of the CSFRA and the fees. Then we'll look at property registration requirements. We'll look at the new compliance and enforcement mechanisms that have been approved by the Rental Housing Committee. So that's new this year. We'll look at any applicable fee exemptions, and then we'll go into the actual online tutorial. All right, so the CSFRA, which stands for the Community Stabilization and Fair Rent Act, was a voter-approved measure in the city, and it's meant to stabilize the community by reducing housing turnover in certain types of rental units. And it does that in three main ways. Stabilizing rents, so there are rent limits each year of how much rent can be increased. Providing eviction protections. And then finally, ensuring a fair rate of return on a property for the landlord. And that's done through a petition process. So most of our multifamily rental properties in Mountain View are covered by the CSFRA, and that's because they were built before it went into effect, which was December 23rd, 2016. We have two different types of covered units. We have fully covered units and partially covered units. So fully covered units, they have to abide by both the rent stabilization part of the law and the eviction protections part of the law. And those would be any multifamily properties built before 1995. Then we have partially covered rental units where only the eviction protection part of the law applies, and those would be units built between 1995 and the start of the law. And then we have some exempt units, and that would be duplexes would be exempt, and then any government or subsidized rental properties are also going to be exempt. So every year we have a rental housing fee. So the CSFRA requires that landlords pay this fee, and this fee is established by our Rental Housing Committee. So that's the body who approves our regulations and sort of oversees the implementation of the CSFRA. So each year they create a budget. And basically what we do is we take that budget and divide it by the number of covered units in the city. And that's how we get our per unit fee. So the fee pays for things like our staff, any third-party contractors we have, like our legal counsel, and it pays for our workshops and other types of clinics that we do. So this shows what the rental housing fee is for this year. So we approved our budget, and the fee is $96 per unit. So that fee was due on the 2nd. Haven't received an invoice, please let me know so we can get that to you and try to avoid late fees. You'll see that every year it's a little bit different, and that's again based on the budget. It should look something like this that you'll get in the mail every January 1st or 2nd. And a lot of the times we bill together with multifamily housing inspection fee, and that's the fire department. So you'll see both of our fees together in one invoice. Different programs, but just billing together. Mobile homes, this is very similar. Alrighty. So now we'll talk a little bit about property registration. And again, if there's any questions about that, just go ahead and type it in the Q&A or the chat or raise your hand. Right, so registration is mandatory. So it is required, and it's required every year. So it's due February 1st of each year. And also, if you have any exemptions that you submit, they're also required to be submitted every year. So most of the time that would be if you're an owner who occupies the unit, or if you are an immediate family member of an owner, you can claim that unit as exempt as well. So you need to submit those every year. The other thing that is required to be updated is certain types of information, and it needs to be updated within 30 days of it happening. So if there's a new tenancy, or if any tenancy is terminated, or if there's any change in ownership or management contact information, you have 30 days to update that in the system from the day that it takes place. We also have some filing requirements that are under the rent stabilization law. So if you're a landlord and you serve a tenant with a termination notice, or if you serve a tenant with unlawful detainer court filings, or banked rent increases, or tenant buyout agreement forms, you also have to submit a copy to the city, and you can do that on this database. And I can sort of show you when we jump into the actual tutorial. So the one thing that I like to go over a little bit more in detail is the termination notice follow-up requirement. So as I think most of us know by now, if there is any regular termination notice, that would be any of the 9 just cause reasons. A most common one would be a 3-day notice to pay rent or quit. If any of those termination notices are served to the tenant, a copy needs to be filed with the city within 3 days of it being served to the tenant. And then the other thing, which is more of like follow-up after the termination notice, is if it goes further and you're actually going to court and you have a summons, if you have a complaint of unlawful detainer, or if you get an actual judgment for an unlawful detainer against the tenant, a copy of that paperwork needs to be submitted within 7 days of the tenant receiving that documentation. And then the other thing is if you serve a termination notice and then the tenant decides to vacate as a result of that termination notice, or just as a result of serving the UD paperwork, you just need to come into the system and say that the tenant moved out as a result of, a termination notice or an unlawful detainer. So you can do all of that online. Any questions about that one? Nope. Let's go ahead and continue. Okay, so this is new. So this is compliance. So just recently, our rental housing committee created new regulations to go over different compliance and enforcement mechanisms for property owners who fail to register their property or fail to pay their rental housing fee. So if you don't do one of those things, then you're going to be considered in substantial non-compliance with the CSFRA. And what that means is if you are out of compliance, a landlord would not be able to raise the rent or file a petition for an upwards adjustment of rent. So for example, if you haven't paid your fees in this year and last year, but you gave a rent increase, that would be considered an unlawful rent increase because you would not have been in compliance with the law because your fees weren't paid or because your property wasn't registered. So that's why it's really important to make sure that you stay in compliance with your registration and your fee payment. So now, this is new. If you are substantially out of compliance, a couple of things are going to happen moving forward. So we'll start mailing non-compliance letters to landlords. And then if 30 days lapses and that hasn't been remedied, then another letter will go out and a copy to affected tenants will also be sent out. So that second non-compliance letter, a copy will be sent to any affected tenant. We also post to the website the status of fees and registration. Registration happens automatically based on your status in the website. However, fees are entered manually, so there's a little bit of a delay, and we'll be updating them every 30 days because staff has to do that manually. And there's also going to be late fees. So a late fee of 4% per unit per month for not paying the annual rental housing fee can be applied. And then a separate late fee of $25 per unit per month for not completing the property registration can be applied. So those are new. And the first letters will be going out in March, at the beginning of March. Okay, we talked a little bit about exemptions already, but if you have an exemption, you can reduce your rental housing fee by the per unit amount. So that's $96 a unit this year. So there are property exemptions. Most of those have been claimed. So if the property was built after, or if it's a subsidized rental property, it's exempt. But we do have the unit exemptions, and that would be the owner occupied or the immediate family member occupies the unit. So you actually can exempt yourself from rent stabilization, and then you would not have to pay the fee. Also, duplexes are exempt. If you have a duplex on your property, sort of let us know because we don't want you to enter in all the information for the duplex since it is exempt. Okay, before I jump into the tutorial, are there any questions? Okay. I think the main thing to know that's new this year is the compliance and enforcement mechanisms that are in place now with the letters and the late fees. That's probably the biggest change from last year. So now we can look at the tutorial. So if you're new and you've never gone on the website and you've never created an account, you want to first go to mvrent.mountainview.gov. That is our registration database website. We also have an online tool here, mountainview.gov/rent stabilization/registration guide, where you can get a step-by-step user guide. All right, so again, if you're new, go to the website and then click on that landlord icon. If you already have an account, you can just log in at this point. If you don't have an account, you want to click, would you like to create an account? It will take you to this pop-up. Type in your first name, last name, mobile phone number is optional. Then you're going to type your email and a password. So here, the email is going to turn into the username. So if you are a larger property and you have more than one person that goes into your account, You want to make this maybe a business email or some email and password that you don't mind more than one person using, because only one account can have access to a property. So that's something to keep in mind. Other than that, passwords must be between 8 and 16 characters, contain a capital letter, a number, and a special character. Once you do that, click submit, and then this green message comes up at the bottom saying email verification pending. So then you'll want to go to your email, and that's the email you just used to create your account. You'll have an email from capsupport@3disystems.com. That is the system that we use to create our registration. So that is a valid email address. You'll go to the link here to activate your account. It should just bring you right back to the internet. And you can see it'll say account activated successfully. You click the go home button and you're back to the beginning. And now you just log in. So at this point, I'll go online. Okay. And so this is our test account. So everything I put in here will just be made up information, but I think it's a little easier than just going through pictures. So once I'm on the website, I'll click landlord. And then I want to sign in. And it will bring me to my home page. So my home page will have an option to email staff. It'll have a button here to pay now. If you haven't paid your fee, it'll take you to the city's website where you can just pay your fee. You enter in some information on your invoice. And then if there is any outstanding petitions, you could respond there, but that's less likely. So the other thing you'll see is my properties here. If I already claimed my properties, if this isn't my first year doing this, my property is probably already on here. So I could just click into it there. However, if I'm new and this is empty, or I have a new property that I'm managing or I bought, I want to add that property. I'll do that here. Sometimes Google Chrome just automatically puts things in there, but we want to make sure that's empty, so we can type in our APN and PIN number there. So this, if you don't have it, is going to be on your invoice. So there's this link here, where to find my APN and PIN. If you get your invoice and you look under the description area, you'll see Community Stabilization and Fair Rent Act. The APN and PIN combination will be there. So once you find that, you just type it in. There you go. And then we'll click verify. And then you'll see under addresses, an address pops up, and that is the address that I was looking for. So then I can click submit. And then you'll see it pops up here. All right, and again, please feel free just to raise your hand or type something in the Q&A if you have a question, or if you want me to repeat anything. So once we're here and we've clicked into our property, you can click anywhere on the picture, anywhere, it'll bring you to this page. We'll see a picture of our property and we'll see a unit count. That's the number of units that our system has for you. So it should be correct. If there's any reason it's not, so maybe you have 4 units, make sure you enter in what is actually on your property. And then once we are reviewing it, we'll notice and we'll double check to make sure our city records are correct. But you want to just make sure the information you're putting in is what's actually on your property. So you'll see in this red box here, we have registration open. That's our current status. And it's red because we're missing these 3 things. So there are 3 things we need to do every year to complete our registration. So we need to add our unit information, owner information, and manager information. I like to personally start with owner and manager contact information, just because I think it's easier that way. So in order to do that, there's a tab at the top that says contacts, and it also has that red exclamation point, sort of indicating that an action needs to happen. So we can click into that tab, and you'll see right now we have no data, so we need to add it. And just as, I guess, a helpful tip, all of our action buttons or action menus that we are going to have in the system, they're going to be over to the right-hand side. So you'll see like this action column if you want to view any of our past cases, if we want to add a contact, anything is going to be over to the right. So when in doubt, sort of look that way. All right, so let's start with our owner contact information. And that's just a drop-down menu, so you can pick whichever one you want to enter first. And let's say it's me. So I'll put that information in, phone number, email, date of initial occupancy. So it's going to ask you before or after February 1st, 1991. That is asking when the property was built and first able to occupy tenant. So the majority of our units are before. And that, if anyone's curious, that's just because it indicates if it's fully or partially covered the property. So now let's go to our business information over here. So I'll go individual owner type, dates of most recent title change, year purchased or transferred. And then here we have preferred method of contact. So we can choose the owner's mailing address or the email, or you could do both, whatever you really prefer. And so after that, we want to go down into the addresses section and fill that out. So the scroll bar is a little incognito over here. So it is here on the side. It's this dark gray bar. So you can scroll down that way. I use my mouse scroll, but make sure you get down to the bottom and fill out this second section here, because sometimes it can hide. So now you want to put in your home address. So that's my address. Sometimes we have our mailing address is the same as our home address. Maybe you have a PO box that you prefer to use as your mailing address. Whatever that is, you want to put that information here. In my case, it's going to be the same as my home address. So I'm going to click this little box that says same as home address, and it will auto-populate for you. And then once I have everything all filled in, I click add. All right, and then it will load up my information here. Again, if I made a mistake and I say, oh, I typed my phone number in wrong or something else like that, I go over to the 3 dots in the action menu that's over to the right-hand side. I can edit, or if the property's sold and now my brother owns it, I could just delete and start over. So again, our action buttons are over to the right. Now you'll still notice we have a red dot here, and that's because we have to also enter in the information for the property manager. So we're going to just go back to the add contact, drop down, and go manager. So if you have a different property manager, of course, put the correct information in for them. If the manager is the same as the owner, you can click this button here and it auto-fills for you. And then just pick how you would like to be contacted. We'll say email. And then we can add that. And then that pops up underneath. And the same is true. So if we want to change something for manager, manager has its own action menu here. Okay. And now you'll notice that this exclamation point is gone because we've entered in what's required. We've entered our owner and our manager information. If we want to enter more, we can continue to add contacts under other and fill those out. They say if you have more than one manager, or sometimes people have had their children who help them manage, they add them in there as well. So whatever works for you, but you are required to do an owner and a manager. All righty. Just looking out for some questions. All right, seeing none. So now that we did that, we want to go back and enter in our unit information. So that's underneath the addresses tab. So we go back to the addresses tab, and you'll see, scrolling, there we go. We still have to do the unit count. So a couple things you could do on your property page. We have our site addresses up here at the top. The computer is going to initially only have what we consider the main address for the property. So, but if you're one of those bigger properties, or if you have multiple small buildings on your lot, you might have more than one address that is just for that one APN, and you want to add them here. So for example, if we had two different properties or two different buildings on this one APN, we might want to add that. And we do that by managing our site addresses. So again, click this button here to add a site address. So let's add our other site address. And if this doesn't apply, just skip it. Let's go San Ramon. Avenue, Mountain View, 94043. Okay. And we add that here. And then you'll see now we have both building addresses for this one property. So that can be helpful, because what if they both are 1 through 3? Well, we don't know which 1 through 3 we're talking about. So now we can have them separated out. The other kind of fun thing you can do up here in the site addresses is update your pictures. So if you just totally hate this Google picture, you can take your own picture, click on that, oh, I might have done that too fast. Click on the little camera and then browse for a file. I'll be very honest, and I don't have any good pictures of properties, but I'll just pick any random picture. Oh, here's a picture of grass. So let me do that. And now you can have the stock picture and then whatever photo you upload. So that's kind of fun. The other thing we'll look at now is if we're scrolling down a little bit, we have this unit mix chart here. Don't worry about that. That's going to autofill as you enter in information for your properties, and it will just populate by itself. But that's just what that's for. So now if we look at the next section, it's going to have our different addresses. So we have one address here, our second address here. So let's go ahead and start with 123 San Ramon. If we want to add units to that, there's two ways we can do it. We can add multiple units at a time using an Excel spreadsheet, or we could add units individually. So let's say we want to start with the spreadsheet. We'll click this Add Update Multiple Units, and we get this pop up. So if you're a first-time user and you've never done this before, stay on this button for add units, because this is going to give you a blank template. If you update existing units, this means you've done this before. It's going to download a spreadsheet of the information that you already have, and then you can update it that way. So just depending on where you are, depends on which button you click. But if we're brand new, we download this fillable spreadsheet. We'll open it up, and it's going to show the required information. And we have an example row here. So you'll want to make sure to fill out your unit information in the same way as this chart. And it's important to stay with the same formatting, because if the formatting is even a little bit off, it'll read as an error in the system. So be careful with your formatting. If you're typing in the dates, type them sort of the same way. So it all looks the same. And then of course, before you upload it, just right click here, delete this row, because otherwise the example row will go and be uploaded for you. So you could do it that way. One other thing I'll mention, if you are updating existing units, please only use this spreadsheet to update your rent amounts. If you have a vacancy, or if you had a unit that was vacant and now has a tenant, please just do that on the actual chart. So we'll show you here. We add units individually. You can click the other button, add unit, enter the unit number. That it is a tenant. It'll expand, enter bedroom, bathroom, move-in date. And then there's this date of last rent increase. If you've given a rent increase, put in the date of your last rent increase. However, if you just had someone move in, say in January, and they haven't had a rent increase yet, this should have the same date as the move-in date, because no rent increase had happened. That technically is the last rent increase. All right, so enter your monthly rent amount. Last monthly rent increase amount. If there was no rent increase given, press 0. Last rent increase percent. If there hasn't been one, do 0. If there has been one, of course, type it in and it will be there. So again, this is all that's required. Anything with the red star, anything past that is additional information that you can update if you would like. If you need help calculating your percentages, you can click this link here. Then you have a rent change calculator. Let's see if I can do this. So you put the old rent and the new rent, and then we have the rent increase percent. In case you need one, here's a good one on the web. Okay. So once you do that and fill in all the required information, just click add. And then you'll see it pops up right here. Again, all of our actions are over to the right. So if you want to do anything on unit 1 at 1237 San Ramon, click the action. You can edit this. So if you need to report vacancies, please do it here and not with the spreadsheet. You would edit that and you would edit the occupant type. Okay. Also here, you can apply for exemptions. You can submit bank to rent increase notices, buyout agreement information, termination notices, termination notice follow-up information. And if you're doing any permit work, you can do that here as well. So now that we know how to do it, all we need to do is enter in the rest of the units. So Let's now go down to 1909 San Ramon. I'll just do individually, since it's a small property. So you'll see, depending on who's the occupant, depends on the number of questions we ask. So if the owner lives there, we don't really ask rent amounts because you're not generally going to be paying yourself rent. You would just be paying the mortgage. So just enter the move-in date. And then you'll see that pop up here. I need to add another unit here. 2. Let's say this is the manager. Studio, 1 bed. He's been with us for a little while. They got a rent increase, but because they're the manager, they pay a little bit. Not a ton. This math is not going to be correct, but you get the gist of it, right? So once we fill that out, that's what's required. Then we click add. And then you'll see our chart here has filled out. We have 1 studio, 1 bedroom, and 1 2-bedroom for a total of 3 units. And here's our unit information. So next year when we come, you can actually keep this up to date all year long. And next year, all you have to do is say, yep, all that looks correct. Now let me review and submit. You'll get an overview here. Make sure it looks good. Everything looks good. And then you can submit. And I declare this is all true and correct. It'll bring me back to my property page. And now you'll see my registration status is registration submitted, which is perfect. That leaves it now to staff to review. And then it'll turn green once it's been reviewed and say registration accepted. I will mention that if you're in this blue status, then you're okay. You're not out of compliance. It just means staff needs to review it. We do, as you can imagine, have a lot of people submitting at the same time. So we're doing our best to stay on top of that. But it can take us a little bit to turn it around and get it accepted. So that's really it. I guess the other thing, since I know you're wondering what's new, the other thing that's new is if you go to this overview section, we've changed it a little bit. So it's going to have, if the property is fully covered, if it's partially covered, it will say partially covered. It has the site address, number of units, this registration status. So that will update right away as the system updates. The current year's annual registration fee paid. This will be updated within the week. So if you've paid, this should be updating to a yes. Previous year's annual rental housing fees paid. So if it says yes, that means all fees have been paid since the beginning of the program. If it says no, it will have a list of years that the fee payment has been late or not completed. So that way you'll know if a property is in compliance or not. Same thing with previous year's registration status. That should be updated and online in the next couple of weeks also. But you'll be able to see this. This will be open to the public, this part and the map. So if you are just anyone on the street, you can type in an address and it will let you know that this top information here. So that's part of that new compliance where properties are searchable. So certain information is searchable. It doesn't have any personal or contact information for any owner or any tenant or anything like that, but it does say if properties have paid and if they've registered. Any questions about any of that? You can raise your hand or type in the Q&A or chat. Okay, probably the final thing I'll mention while I'm still online with you is that if you scroll down on your page, you have this case history. It's always going to show at the bottom. And for you, you'll be able to see any action that you have taken on this property. So if you've been submitting termination notices or exemptions, all of that's going to be filed away in your case history. This is not something that's available to be seen by anybody in the public. This is only for the person who logs in and has claimed this property. They can see the past history on the property. So that just comes in handy sometimes. Like if you wanted to see, did you register last year? This property did not. No, that didn't want to load. But it'll show you the status here. And you'll see that they have not registered except for this year. It's the first year they registered. So that owner can see what they have done or not done on that property. And that is that. So I'll just go back to the PowerPoint quickly and finish up. But then we'll hang around at the end just in case there's any questions. I can jump back on the website. All right, so let's talk a little bit about resources. This is our contact information for the rent stabilization program. You can give us a call, 650-903-6136, or send us an email, mvrent@mountainview.gov. Visit our website anytime, mountainview.gov/rent stabilization. We do have staff that speak Spanish. And if there's any other types of translations needed, we can get that set up as well. All right, so we have office hours. So every Tuesday we have virtual office hours from 10 to 12, and that's on Zoom at mountainview.gov/RSP office hours. That's just open to anyone who has a question about anything related to rent stabilization or tenant landlord topics. Otherwise, we have our Housing and Eviction Help Center, and this is actually both in person and on Zoom. So if you're interested in having in-person one-on-one help, you can visit us at the Mountain View Public Library on the second floor program room. We're there every first and third Thursday from 1 to 5 p.m. We also have a free mediation program in the city of Mountain View. So it's totally free for anyone who lives or works or owns property in the city. We have trained mediation volunteers who help two parties discuss any sort of issue they're having and come to a resolution, sort of facilitate them coming to their own resolution. So it's 100% confidential. And we've noticed that there is a high success rate when two parties sit down and talk with each other. So this is wonderful for tenants and landlords. This is wonderful for landlords who maybe have two tenants who aren't getting along. They do a lot of neighbor to neighbor issues. So if you have a situation and you want to refer tenants to it, you can let them know that information exists as well. Some legal resources. So there's the Santa Clara County Bar Association Lawyer Referral Service or the Superior Court Self-Help Center. And then just to finish up, here is our information again, our city's program email, which is mvrent@mountainview.gov. And I just also threw my email up there as well, which is andrea.kennedy@mountainview.gov. All righty, so that is the end of the presentation. I'll hang around for any questions if we have any. So again, we will be sending this recording and the PowerPoint to anybody who's registered. I'm not seeing any questions. So thank you for coming. Have a great rest of your day. And please reach out to us if you have any questions. Bye.